amazing couple of weeks cruising around the country, checking out a bunch of different boats, and learning a lot about cruising sailboats and what to look for. And it's all kind of coming to a close here, and we're both getting super excited.
So we've narrowed down our boat search to 2 boats, the Pacific Seacraft 40 and the Valiant 42. And it's worth noting that these 2 boats might not be the perfect 2 boats for everyone out there. We picked these 2 boats based on our personal experiences and our priorities and our needs right now. So if the boat you love with all your heart and soul isn't on this list, that's probably just because we have different priorities, and it doesn't mean that you're a bad person.
But as for the priorities that have directed our search, we basically have 3. Just to recap, number 1 is we wanted to find a boat that would be a good home for a family of 4 for the next 10 years. Number 2 was we wanted a boat that would let us sail more and work on the boat less. And number 3, we wanted a boat that prioritized comfort offshore over comfort at anchor.
So starting with priority number 1, I'm not pregnant and we haven't had any kids yet.
That we know of.
Yeah. But we'd really like to start planning for a family of potentially 4. So we got a hold of 2 of our favorite sailing channels, Rand Sailing and SV DELOS, to pick their brain about what to look for in a boat that we want to raise kids on.
Hi guys, Malin and Johan here from Rand Sailing. So some of the features that we were looking for and that were important for us when we were looking for a family boat are a roomy and deep cockpit with some good floor space so that our daughter can move around safely.
Another thing was to have a good sail plan on the boat and a good layout for the rigging and how you handle the boat. Because when you have kids on the boat, or we have realized that you sail the boat mostly single-handedly. Another thing we wanted to have was a swimming platform in the stern of the boat to make it easier to come on and off the boat and into the dinghy when at anchor with the baby.
Next, we reached out to SV DELOS to hear a little bit about what it's like raising the little nugget.
Hello, Project Atticus. I'm Brian, SV DELOS.
And Karen, and this is little Sierra. She's now 18 months old, so 1.5 years, huh? It's crazy.
And how many miles has she sailed? Maybe 6,000, something like that?
Yeah, we've sailed quite a lot.
She's earned her first swallow tattoo, but she's going to have to wait till she's at least 18. It changed the way we sail a lot.
Yeah.
Because we used to really, really love doing overnight passages and long passages. With her now, it basically makes me a single-handed sailor and Kaza a single parent.
Yeah.
Because, somebody has to watch her when the boat is moving. She gets frustrated. She has to walk around. She falls. And then you have to feed her and you have to put her down for naps and you have to change her. And when the conditions are difficult, you know that just taking care of yourself can be a challenge. Just putting on your pants can be a challenge. Now try to do that with a little uncooperative human being. We have a very deep cockpit on Delos, and it's very protected, and that's an excellent place for her to play when we're sailing. And so I know some boats have aft cockpits with like an open transom, and I think that might be a little bit more difficult. But I think we have a center cockpit that's enclosed. It's like a deep well. It just feels very safe and secure.
And we've actually been able to have her outside when we're sailing, sitting with us in the cockpit, feeling very safe, even though the condition have been pretty hectic.
Yeah.
And then the size, Delos is 53 feet. As 3 people on the boat now, it's plenty of space for us.
It's way more boat than we need.
Yeah.
We used to have 6 adults on this boat, which I don't understand how we did that, but now it's plenty of space.
But to be able to have a separate room for her where we can make noise, we can work on the boat and don't have to care about her when she's sleeping and stuff.
Yeah.
So much, a lot of tiptoe, that has been very, very nice for us.
This is Sierra's little boombo chair. She loves to sit here because she is in the center of the action when she's eating, and we can kind of stand up and cook food in the galley. This is her
we don't
little
have
tub.
a separate shower,
No.
so I just sit on the toilet and shower, and Sierra plays in a bathtub at the same time.
Yay!
Yay! Do you want to show your tent?
You want to get in there?
Oh!
So that's her safe place. You can put her in there.
And then you can zip it up. You can even...
The nice thing about this tent is it also collapses up to like the size of a Frisbee.
So even now when we like go to places and she needs to take a nap during the day, you know, you just bring this tent with you and it basically packs up to this size.
So based on the advice that we got from Delos and Ran, it seems like we really needed to look for a boat with a safe and deep cockpit, a boat that could be easily single-handed. And as far as size, Delos has a 50-foot boat, and it seems like that's more than enough room for the three of them. And in fact, a lot of their baby-proofing systems and solutions are portable, and I think they could be implemented on a lot smaller boat.
So early on in our boat search, we realized we needed to figure out what size boats we were going to be looking at. And so we reached out to one of our all-time sailing mentors, Lynn PARDEY, to ask her for her thoughts on what size we should look for.
Our motto has always been, go simple, go small, go now, and I stick with that one. So my first bit of advice to almost anyone looking at a Bluewater cruising boat, their first one is think 5 feet smaller. Put the extra money in the bank, let you outfit the boat without worrying quite so much, let you enjoy your sailing life because you have a bit of extra money. Don't overestimate your willingness to fix a fixer-upper or your partner's willingness to do so, because every boat is going to take 30% more work than you expected to get it ready to go.
So, given Lynn's advice, we decided to start our search by looking at a couple of 37-footers, the Naiad 370 and the Pacific Seacraft 37. And after checking those boats out, we really realized that 37 feet was going to be a little bit too small for what we were hoping to accomplish. Mostly because we want to be on this next boat for 10 years minimum. Now there are some smaller boats that do have really large interiors that would work great for us to raise 2 kids on for 10 years. But along with those larger interiors come hull shapes that lose the sailing characteristics that we're looking for in Atticus 2.
So we started looking at boats a little bit bigger in about the 40-foot range, and it turns out another one of our sailing mentors, sailing author and marine engineer Nigel CALDER, lived on a Pacific Seacraft 40 with 2 kids, and he has some words to say about if it's doable with a family of 4.
What do you think? Do you feel like a 40-foot boat is an appropriate size boat to raise?
It's plenty big enough. We've met people cruising with kids right up to sort of 10, 11 years old on 30-foot boats. Now that's a little tight, but 40, you've got plenty of room for 4 people.
So after talking to Nigel, we basically decided that 40 feet would be the minimum length that we'd be looking for our future family boat. Now, the next priority that we had to consider is finding a boat that would let us sail more and work on the boat less. All sailboats need work, and that's just a fact. But older boats typically need more work and upkeep than younger or newer boats. The problem being that newer boats are going to be a lot more expensive than older boats. So what we wanted to do was to try and find out if there's a boat age where you get the most value for your money, where there's not too much work to be done, but it's also not terribly expensive. So to try and figure this out, we talked to another one of our sailing mentors, John KRETSCHMER, to see what he thinks about it.
We bought Quetzal in 2003. So she was at, say, 19 years old at that point. So I was able to get a great buy on the boat. Was old enough to where the depreciation had really been wrung out of her. And yet it was young enough and had been lightly used to where the boat still felt newish for sure. And Neptune knows we have put a lot of miles on it since. We have over 150,000 miles on Quetzal in the last 20 years or 18 years. Now we're at the point, though, where we're spending an awful lot of money to keep her up. The point is that we've been able to get a lot of great years in the boat before we started to have to do really serious big-time refits. So I think the boats you're looking at are right on the money because they're about 20 years old or a little less, maybe a little more, but not 30 years old and not 10 years old. So you're getting really good buys, relatively speaking. I mean, the replacement value of a brand new a 42 would be, $1 million, and you're able to buy it for a quarter of that or less, and you're going to have a long run with the boat before you start doing serious things. I think that is really the sweet spot on a used boat. Of course, it's conditional. It's based on, what condition the boat's in, the gear itself, whether it's been updated along the way. But overall, I think that's a pretty good spot to consider a used boat at.
Now, we really don't want to discourage people out there who have bought fixer-upper sailboats and are working hard to try and get those boats back up to cruising shape. We did that. We bought a boat for $5,000. It was a total piece of crap. It was 50 years old, and it was a lot of really hard work, but we did really have a positive experience. I mean, we got to see a lot of the Caribbean. We had a lot of amazing experiences. But I do want to express that I feel like we could have done it better. I don't think we really saved money in the long run by buying such an old boat that needed so much work. So in our experience, for people who are trying to save money and go cruising on a tight budget, what our advice is to compromise on the size of the boat and not so much on the age of the boat. And in our situation with Atticus 1, we compromised on both age and size. So we had a small 30-foot boat, but we only paid $5,000 for it. It was a tough way to learn, and a lot of people learn it that way, and it's okay, man. Like, the School of Hard Knocks is a good school to go to. But if you can save yourself and compromise on size over the age of your next cruising boat, you will probably be doing yourself a favor. So once we decided we wanted a boat around 20 years old, and after having figured out that we wanted boats at 40 feet and above, we kind of needed to decide how large could we go. And that was pretty easy to figure out, because at our budget, looking at boats about 20 years old, really, once we started to get to about 42 feet and up, boats were getting too expensive for us. And so we, at that point, narrowed our search to boats right there between 40 and 42 feet long.
And John KRETSCHMER, again, has been such a guiding light and this beacon of hope for us as we kind of struggle with the pros and cons of what to look for in a boat. So here's what he had to say about not looking at boats that were excessively large.
It would be really easy to broaden your search into bigger, wider, longer, more commodious boats, but you've stayed really in kind of a narrow path, and I admire you for that, because I think you know what makes a good boat. I think the room factor is really overrated. Sailing's not about what you can put in your boat, it's about what you don't need. That's really the magic of cruising, is you discover how little you do need. So to make decisions based on space, up to a point, it's kind of a silly game, because there is no space on any boat. And what you want is a boat that delivers the performance, it just delivers the style of sailing that you want.
Now, a lot of people have been asking us why we haven't considered any catamarans on our boat hunt so far. So we reached out to our Boker, I hardly know her. So we reached out to our broker, Bernie, for his thoughts on catamarans.
First of all, most catamarans in the price range that Des and Jordan can afford, and I'm talking about $250,000, are going to be charter-ridden, beat-up, 45-foot, 43-foot catamarans, and they are not ocean-going sailboats. I do not think that a catamaran under 50 foot works for a round-the-world voyage. What does it take to buy a really good catamaran used in today's marketplace? My opinion is that it's going to cost you at least $500,000 used, and the reason why is because a real ocean-going catamaran is going to basically be a cantina, a leopard. Forget about the gunboats. You're going to have to sell everything you own times 10 and borrow a lot of money. So basically, there are not a lot of them. You look at the Balis and all the ones that basically are like wedding cakes and things of sorts. They're great for the Chesapeake Bay, the Intercoastal Waterway, a little bit of the Bahamas, but they're not boats you're going to go sail to New Zealand on.
And we also reached out to John KRETSCHMER for his thoughts.
Are catamarans capable of sailing offshore around the world? Absolutely they are. Many people are doing it right now. Do I recommend them for you? No. The thing about cats is that, to me, most sort of offshore sailors insist, or at least eventually evolve, to wanting dagger boards. centerboards in each hull that allow you to sail upwind. Stub keel cats just simply make a tremendous amount of leeway, and flat out reality is they have to motor a lot in order to compensate for the leeway that they make and the inability to sail upwind. And I just don't think that's your MO. I don't think that's the place where you guys see yourselves. And centerboard cats like RUTHERFORD or Katana, which we have a lot of miles on, allow you to sail upwind for sure. But they are way over your budget. For the budget you're talking about, you're looking at what would be extremely used production cats that you could afford. And the jury is kind of out on where these production cats are going to be. So you're looking at 20 to 25-year-old catamarans right now. Most of them will have been in charter. And so what those boats are going to look like 25 years from now is a really good question. And I have my feelings that they're going to become super, super expensive to maintain. The monohulls of the world are kind of proven where they stand. You're looking at boats that are 20 years old now. You're going to be sailing a long time. When that boat's 40 years old, it's kind of a known quantity. When a production cat is 40 years old, it's going to be interesting what they need to have done, how the structural forces will talk to them.
Now, a lot of people have also been asking us why we aren't considering more center cockpit boats, especially seeing as how the two sailing channels that we asked for advice from, SV DELOS and RAN Sailing, both have center cockpit boats. So we wanted to ask John KRETSCHMER what he thought about us looking into more center cockpit boats around the 40 to 42 foot range.
I think the overriding thing for you guys is that center cockpit boats that are less than 45 or 46 feet feel really cramped, and the cockpit itself is small. There are some great 45-foot center cockpit boats. The Norseman 447 comes to mind, the Tazwell 43, but they have really small cockpits for sure. If we were looking at a 50-foot boat or a 55-foot boat, I think a center cockpit would make sense. But looking at a 40-foot boat, 42-foot boat, I think it's too small to really make a center cockpit work.
So after all of that, we knew that we were looking for a 40 to 42 foot monohull around 20 years old, which sort of leads us to our third and final priority, which is we wanted a boat that optimized for comfort offshore over comfort at anchor. Now, the question then is, why are we prioritizing this? Why do we care so much about comfort offshore? I mean, 95% of our life is spent on the boat at anchor. And it's a great question. And the reality is that when we first started sailing, I had imagined that once boats get down to the Caribbean, that they had basically crossed some sort of a finish line. And now they're just bouncing around from island to island and exploring and having a blast. But the fact is the vast majority of cruising boats that make it to the Caribbean sort of just settle in an anchorage or a marina and stay there for years. There's a very small percentage of boats in the Caribbean that are actively moving around on a regular basis. And a lot of that is because sailing offshore can be miserable. The motion that you experience is extreme. You're like wet and salty all the time. It's hard to cook good meals. You're not sleeping that much. You're sleeping like 4 hours at a time. And so our primary goal with Atticus 2 is to make sure that we are one of that small percentage of boats that are actively moving, that are actively exploring. And so to do that, we wanted to make sure that we got a boat that was as comfortable offshore as possible and that would make sailing offshore as fun as possible. And we also wanted a boat that would be more safe, that we wouldn't be scared about going offshore. And so John KRETSCHMER had a lot to say on this topic, so let's see what he says.
My criteria for a great boat is pretty simple. I need to know that when we pull up the anchor, when we slip the mooring, when we back out of a slip, that we can shove off anywhere there's water and do it in confidence. And I mean that genuinely. I don't want to have any limitations. So I think for you guys, one of the critical questions to answer in your minds and to be as honest as possible is, what do you plan to do with your new boat? And I think it's pretty clear. You want to sail around the world. You want to sail all about the world. You want to explore the world. You don't want to have limitations, and that's the definition of a blue water boat. To me, a blue water boat, a good boat, a boat you believe in, is just a ticket to freedom. It's that simple.
And Lynn Pardey also gave us some really great advice about the importance of hull design and sailability.
So to me, I'm always more interested in the sailing qualities of the boat and the sail handling ability around the boat than I am on the interiors. Interiors are always a compromise, but I don't like to compromise on the hull design and the deck layout. So the first questions I'll ask about any boat I'm looking at: does it sail really well in light airs? Will it heave to nicely? Then I start looking at the hull itself. Does it have a rudder that can withstand a bit of a grounding? Because eventually we all are going to run aground somewhere. So does it have a good skeg to protect that rudder, or is the rudder well hung on the stern post?
So ultimately, we decided that we wanted Atticus 2 to have a really substantial, somewhat conservative fin keel with a full skeg hung rudder and a hull shape that prioritizes comfort offshore. Now, if you're curious what that kind of hull shape looks like, we went into a lot of depth on that subject with our broker Bernie. You can click on the link up somewhere here to check out that episode. Now, the vast majority of sailboats out there on the water today are modern production boats like Jeanneau's, Benetou's, Sun Odysseys, Hanses, there's a bunch of them. And we wanted to ask John KRETSCHMER what his thoughts are on these sorts of boats.
Contrary to what a lot of people think, I am not anti-production boat at all. I think they serve a vital function for the sailboat economy. Without new boats, the sailboat business is going to dry up, and most of us, a lot of us, were introduced to sailing in one form of a production boat or not. And then let's just be honest, there are lots of production boats out there sailing all around the world. I think Benetou's have made more ocean crossings than any other boat, especially when they were only built in Europe. All the boats that came to the North American charter fleet in the Caribbean were sailed around their own bottoms. It's not that production boats aren't capable of doing exactly what you want to do. It's just, to me, they're not the kind of boat that I like to sail offshore. And by that, it's a function of design. I mentioned early on that design trumps virtually everything when it comes to choosing a blue water boat. And a modern style, high freeboard, flat bottom boat, high volume boat that requires a beam for initial stability and sacrifices ultimate stability for that, and has a really rough ride in a seaway, it's just not the boat I want to be on offshore. It's really that simple. I like a boat that slices through the water, that never pounds, or if it pounds, is rare. I like a boat that makes great, that tracks really well, that does not make leeway. The kind of boat that makes blue water sailing a lot more enjoyable. If you want to be a true world voyager, you have to know that when things get tough, you can count on the boat. And it's not that you can't count on production boats at all, but it's just that they require a lot of micromanagement. I think the thing that separates a really great blue water boat, a boat like the Valiant 42, from other boats, is that when things really get tough, these boats kind of look after you. A really good blue water boat just does not need to be micromanaged. And modern style boats with fractional rigs, spade rudders, kind of twitchy helms, if you let go of the helm, the wheel just spins around. They don't adapt well to self-steering. They need you to manage them. They're capable, no question about it. And I'm not riding both sides of the fence here. It really is true. I mean, there are production boats everywhere today. But in my way of thinking, they're just more of a challenge and less rewarding. And so that's why I tend to really focus on what I consider to be more blue water boats.
Now, as I mentioned a moment ago, we have only been looking at boats that have full skegged rudders. And that's mostly because when we were in Isu Mujeres several years ago, we saved up enough money to continue our adventure by, in part, repairing and rebuilding 4 different rudders over the course of a summer for different cruisers who had ran aground and bent or destroyed their rudders in various parts of the Caribbean. And so that really formed my opinion on how important it is to protect your rudder. But we still wanted to double check with John KRETSCHMER to ask him if he felt like we were being overly conservative and overly cautious and narrowing our boat search unnecessarily.
When you consider why boats are abandoned at sea, it's not usually because of storms. It's almost never because of collision. That's super rare. You don't abandon your boat for losing the rig. What happens, the reason you abandon boats is because you lose the rudder. The rudder is the key to happiness. It's the key to everything in a boat. And so protecting the rudder has to be one of the biggest priorities of an offshore sailor. And you're right, the idea of a catastrophic grounding is more of a risk than a lot of people realize. Just one miscalculation puts you on a reef. We were anchored in Isla Mujeres, and we dragged anchor, and we came really close to dragging into this barge, and the rudder took a little smack, and the skeg saved it. We've been all over the world and seen boats hauled out with bent rudders, and they're the lucky ones that didn't have to abandon ship. So I think that there are some places you just have to draw lines in the dirt, and a skeg hung rudder is a good place to draw one in my view.
And one final thing on this subject is that John KRETSCHMER in a couple of our episodes has mentioned that he's not a huge fan of bowsprits. Well, I know that Lynn PARDEY really disagrees with that viewpoint. We wanted to give her an opportunity to express her thoughts on the matter.
Well, you've got to remember, I spent 47 years sailing on boats with quite long bowsprits, 8 feet in one case. I love them. They are a light air extension. They can carry lots of light air sails without having an exceptionally tall mast. It makes handling ground tackle much easier because your bow rollers can be away from the bow of the boat, out on the bowsprit. Properly designed, they are very strong. They can even act as a shock absorber if you happen to come into your marina berth a little bit too fast. The only negative, costs more to go into a marina berth. Panama Canal, going to be some extra charges there. On the other hand, race boats are now going back to bowsprits. They call them bayonet bowsprits. They are retractable. Nice compromise there.
So now it's down to the moment you've all been waiting for. In this corner, we have the Valiant 42, stout, robust, like a burly man just come down off the mountain after fighting a bear and a tiger at the same time. We have the Valiant 42.
Sure.
And then in this corner, the refined gentleman with a top hat and petticoat, who in reality could actually beat everyone in the dingiest bar you've ever been to in an arm wrestling match, the Pacific Seacraft 40!
Yeah, that's good.
Was that good?
Yeah. So, like we said before, we've narrowed our boat search down to 2 boats, the Pacific Seacraft 40 and the Valiant 42. They're both really incredible options, and we'd be lucky to walk away with either of these boats.
In fact, I'd argue we'd be extremely lucky to live on and sail any of the boats that we've reviewed. And so it's important for us to say that we've really been a little bit critical of these boats because we really wanted to dive deep into which boat would suit our needs the best.
But before we start to compare the pros and cons of each boat, let's hear from John KRETSCHMER.
Let's be real here. You can't go wrong with that choice. Both those boats are really terrific boats. There's nobody who knows anything about blue water sailing who doesn't think that both of those boats are super capable boats. And it's interesting that you've narrowed down to those two because they're really similar. Not as roomy as some others for sure, but big enough for what you guys want to do. And I just love your philosophy. This isn't about getting the biggest boat you can handle or you can afford. It's getting a boat that fulfills what you want to do and fulfills your dreams and that you have complete confidence in. I just can't tell you how important that is.
Man, that guy is just awesome.
I know. I
He's
would
just
give him
dude.
my firstborn.
Oh, we're back. So we're going to talk about the Pacific Seacraft 40 first. So first of all, the PS40 has a much better nav station. It'd be way more comfortable to sit there for hours at a time and do computer work. It also has a much better salon, in my opinion. I think it would be more well suited to a family of 4 spending, most of their time in that area. The engine is a lot better on the Pacific Seacraft 40. It's more appropriately sized, whereas the Valiant is a little underpowered. The PS40 has a protected prop, whereas the Valiant 42's prop is exposed. And that, at some point, could become a real problem. The deck layout / design of the PS40 I thought was just amazing. Like everywhere I looked, I saw little details that were really well thought out and geared toward long-term voyagers and liveaboards and cruisers. Also, the PS40 that we're looking at is in incredibly good condition. I mean, I think it would be hard to find a 23, 24-year-old boat in the United States that's in such pristine condition. And finally, the PS40's asking price is about $30,000 less than the Valiant 42, and that means a lot. Now, it's worth mentioning that in our last video, I mentioned that the Pacific Seacraft would be roughly a $50,000 difference because we could save money on sales tax by registering in Rhode Island, whereas the boat in Seattle, you wouldn't have that tax advantaged situation. Well, it turns out you can register boats on the West Coast in Oregon and basically save on sales tax. That way, it turns out the difference between the boats isn't $50,000, it's actually more like $30,000.
Now let's talk about where the Valiant 42 wins. I think the Valiant 42 has much larger and more comfortable berths. So the quarter berth in the Valiant 42 is ginormous, whereas the quarter berth on the Pacific Seacraft is definitely doable, but it is a lot smaller. The Valiant 42 also wins on engine access. It would be so easy to get to any part of the engine and a lot of the other components that we'd need to do regular maintenance on. It also wins on construction. I've never been on a boat that felt so solid and rugged and beautiful at the same time. And I also love the cabinetry on the Valiant 42. The Pacific Seacraft 40 has a lot of storage, but it's hard to get to, and it's a lot of like drop-down access, whereas the Valiant 42 has drawers and cabinets throughout the boat that are really easy to access. Finally, the Valiant 42 wins on performance, but just by a little bit.
And in fact, we're not even certain of this fact. We haven't sailed both boats and kind of put them head to head before, so it's hard for us to say, but at least in theory and from anecdotal experience from other people that we've talked to, it sounds like the V42 would sail a little bit better than the Pacific Seacraft.
Now let's jump into what both of us thought of each one of these boats on a personal level. I'll start off by saying that I fell head over heels for the Valiant 42. It just felt so beefy and sturdy. I just had a feeling on the Valiant 42 that I didn't have on any of the other boats that we saw.
And the funny thing is, I had that same experience. Like after we saw that first Valiant 42, we didn't want to say it in the videos, but we were like, this is the boat. Like, this is it.
Yeah.
After seeing the Pacific Seacraft 40, I guess I kind of got brought back down to earth in a way that Desiree didn't, Like Desiree's still in that love phase, She's like the passionate romance phase of the Valiant 42. Whereas I kind of saw the Pacific Seacraft 40 and started to think, this would be a better boat for raising kids on, if that's what we plan to do. That main salon in the Pacific Seacraft is worlds better, in my opinion, than the salon in the Valiant 42. And even though it's not built as well, it's still built really well. It's just not as well as a Valiant 42.
So we want to know what you think. Are you on Team Valiant 42 or Pacific Seacraft 40?
So to participate in this poll, you're going to have to make your way to our community tab on our YouTube channel. So to do that, just click on our little icon down below that says Sailing Project Atticus. Then you can scroll over to the community tab, click on that, and right below that you should see the poll. and you can just click on that
And
and vote.
Vote for the Valiant 42.
But guys, really, vote for the Pacific Seacraft, okay? I won't tell Desiree, she won't find out. And also, we will be announcing what boat we will be choosing for Atticus 2 in a live stream next week on Wednesday, March 10th at 7 p.m. And it's gonna be a lot of fun. We hope you guys can join us to hear the big news and see if, we go with the lame one or the really great option. So we'll see you guys then.
And now that we're at the end of our boat hunt, we really wanted to take a minute to thank some of the people who've made this boat series possible and have really provided us with a lot of guidance and advice and support throughout these last couple of months.
And first and foremost, we want to thank John KRETSCHMER for all of the amazing insight and guidance that he's offered us, as well as just a lot of his time. So thank you so much, John. It's meant the world to us, and we hope to be anchored next to Quetzal one of these days. Also, if you guys have enjoyed John's expertise and experience and knowledge on the boat buying process and finding the right cruising sailboat, you should definitely check out his boat buying series and webinar that he's going to be doing shortly. And you can find more information about that at his website, which we will link to in the description below. Also, he's got some amazing books. My personal favorite is Sailing a Serious Ocean. Definitely check that out on his website. And if you'd like to hop on an offshore charter with John KRETSCHMER, you can find out more information about that on his website as well. And also a huge thank you to our broker, Bernie Jackets. He provided a huge amount of information and it was super helpful throughout this whole process. And just to clarify, Bernie was our buyer's broker. So he was basically our representative in all of the dealings that we had throughout this entire boat search. And we also want to thank all of the selling brokers or listing brokers that we worked with. These are the people, the brokers that represented the boats that we looked at. And they're the ones that were there while we were filming, taking like hours of their day basically to allow us to make these episodes.
So a huge thank you to Randy Greenfield from David Walters Yachts, who represented the Tiana 42, Robert Hall from Deaton Yacht Sales, who represented the Shannon 43 and the Naiad 370, Matt Rutherford from Eastport Yacht Sales, who represented the Valiant 42, and finally Dave Van Den Arend from Crusader Yacht Sales, who's representing the Pacific Seacraft 40.
Also, a huge shout out to Matt Rutherford, who was the listing broker on the Valiant 42. This guy is an absolute sailing legend. If you haven't seen it yet, I highly recommend the documentary Red Dot on the Ocean. He's also trying to kind of meld his passion for sailing with ocean scientific research. So he started the Ocean Research Project, and he's got a YouTube channel under that name. He's got a lot of really cool videos on there about his epic voyages that he's done up into the Arctic, and he's also refitting this huge boat to become like the most epic, badass research sailing vessel of all time. So if you want to learn more about that stuff, go check out his YouTube channel, Ocean Research Project. Also, we wanted to thank some of our mentors from today's episode. Special thanks to Nigel CALDER. We're huge fans of his books. My favorite is probably The Cruiser's Handbook. Definitely check that out. He's also doing an online course all about marine electrical systems. So if you don't know the difference between a tinned marine wire and the tail of a mongoose, then definitely check out this here. That's so stupid.
Yeah.
So if you know nothing about marine electrical systems, this is the class for you. You can check that out at boathowto.com. And a huge thanks to Lynn Pardy. She has been one of our sailing heroes since we first bought Atticus. She's got a lot of books that she's written, and I recommend them all, but definitely check out Storm Tactics. That's one of our favorites. And you can find out more about how to buy these books at Lynn's website, which we will link to in the description down below.
And finally, a huge thank you to SV DELOS and Rand Sailing for taking the time to walk us through what it's like to be boat parents. If you haven't subscribed to their channels yet, definitely do, and we'll link to their channels in the description down below.
All right, guys, so this has been a super fun boat road trip, search, hunt, whatever you want to call it. It's been super interesting. We've learned a lot. We hope you guys have too. And other than that, we'll see you guys next week for the live stream, and we'll see you for upcoming episodes when we finally start cruising again. So thanks for sticking with us. We'll catch you guys next week.